Coach radio show, an Irish talk show for men. And welcome to everyone that's listening out there today. And of course, our love, our blessings, our warm felt feelings and heartfelt wishes to all the people out there who have been or are being impacted by the fires in Santa Rosa. I'm going to dedicate this show to you today. Love for you to listen in. We've got a man coming in today, Mr. George Pransky, Dr. George Pransky, coming in to talk about the nature of the human experience. Where does our experience of our world come from? Are we at the mercy of what's happening in the world? Or are we able to be in the world and not be affected by it? And that's a very, very powerful thing, that if we can start to understand that, then everything that's going on in your lives and what's going on at the moment in Santa Rosa with all the fires in the surrounding areas, it can have a different meaning. That's not to water down or dilute what you're going through. But Dr. Pransky today is going to talk about, as you're going through it, how is the experience being filtered? How is the experience being felt? What's happening inside our bodies that makes us experience something either as dramatic and drastic or something as simple as joy and peace and love? Now, it's a very, very big topic, and I'm going to do my best, of course, to be sensitive as I do in every show. But I'm going to do my best to be sensitive today to what's going on in at least in our surrounding area here in our little patch of the world known as Sonoma County. But I also want to try and put out something else other than this is what's happening and it's terrible and it's horrible and this is how I feel. All those things are relevant. All those things are real for you given the thinking that you have. But we're gonna talk about relationships. We're going to talk about a few different areas today, but we're going to talk about them in the sense of it's not what's happening outside of us that truly dictates how we think and feel. It's what's going on inside of us that dictates how we look at, how we feel about, how we experience what's going on the outside. Now that's it can be quite profound. It can be quite a different experience to have with life. And this man, Dr. George Pransky, has changed the way I experience my life in ways that I can't even begin to share with you. But I have a lot less stress in my life, a lot less anxiety in my life, a lot less ups and downs in my life, and I'm not at the mercy of life. Because being at the mercy of everything that happens outside of us, it's not an easy way to live. It's a really tough way to live, in fact. And life is constantly changing. And if we don't have something internally that we can see, that we can reference, that we can depend on as truth, something that does not change, something that is unaffected by the outside world, the outside conditions, the outside going-ons, then we have a real chance at a successful, at a peaceful, at a beautiful, at a happy life. And this is what Dr. George Pransky is going to be talking about today, is how do we see that? How do we experience that? How do we start to begin to look at life, to experience life in a whole new way? Now, what this man is sharing is profound. And I guarantee you today that you will start to see things that will help you not to just experience what's going on outside of you, but also to understand and experience what's going on inside of you in a whole different new way. in a magical, in a mystical, in a practical, in a very down-to-earth, beautiful, wonderful way. What Dr. George Pransky is going to be sharing today, I believe in my heart and soul, is the future of psychology. It's the future of the mind-body connection. It's the future of the inner world that we experience and the outer world that's going on, regardless of what we're doing. Life is always happening. Very profound man with a very profound teaching. Now, this is not something that you need to... there's no techniques, there's no processes, there's no things that you need to remember. This is simply a way... It's who we are at the truth level. It's who we already are. So there's nothing for you to do or to remember or to get. But there's plenty for you to see about the nature of the human experience. And that's what we're going to be talking about today. So welcome to the Celtic Coach radio show. You're listening on KOWS, KOWS LP, 92.5, Occidental, California. Number to call in the studio is 707-755-9250. You're listening to the Celtic Coach radio show, talk show for men. Welcome, everyone. Let's play a little bit of the old Irish music to get us going. Welcome, everyone. Sonoma County, it's all you manly men, and to all the ladies listening out there, a hearty and healthy Irish hello. Now, I've had a lot of people saying, wow, this guy is on the show, and I'm very, very, very happy to have him on the show. And I appreciate, even with everything going on, I know there's a lot of people listening in to hear what George has to say. And I've also kind of asked George to talk a little bit about the fires and how we can kind of stay more centered and still have peace in ourselves, even with everything that's going on in Santa Rosa and, of course, in our lives in general. So, without further ado, our next guest is George Pransky, Dr. George Pransky to all of his friends, is one of the two founders of a breakthrough approach to human understanding that's currently among the fastest growing approaches in the world. In other words, this man really knows what he's talking about. That's the Irish version. He's taught for over 40 years, 40 plus years, and he still looks like he's in his 30s. Individuals, couples, businesses, and colleagues. Dr. Pransky is also the author of the Relationship Handbook, which I have read and I highly, highly recommend. We'll talk a little bit about that at the end of the show. And he's also done at least over 50 audio recordings. During his career, he's also served on the faculty of 3 graduate universities, including West Virginia University, School of Medicine, and Michigan State University. Go Spartans! Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's Go Blue. No, that's the other team. All right. Currently, he's a partner of Pransky and Associates, pranskyandAssociates.com in LaConner, Washington, and on the executive committee of the 3 Principles Global Community. Put it this way, gentlemen, and to all the ladies that are listening out there. If you put Yoda, Abraham Lincoln, and Professor Xavier from the X-Men, if you put all those 3 guys together, you would come up with this man. Yoda for the wisdom, Abraham Lincoln for the practicality, straightforwardness, and Professor Xavier for the ability to be able to read your mind, know exactly what to say to you in order for you to see something new and live a better life. Please welcome to the show an all-around good guy, a man with, I think, with one answer to solve all your problems, Dr. George Pransky. George, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Dermot, but I was a little better before you set me up for people would be disappointed with those comparisons you had. You know?
Yeah, The pressure's on, George.
The pressure's on, yeah. That's awfully tough to live with.
You're all the way up there in Lacona, Washington. How is life up there, George?
Well, life in Lacona is very slow, which I like, and very easy.
Yeah.
Living in a small town, you walk to the post office, and it's just great.
Yeah. Well, you lived in San Francisco for quite a while, George, didn't you?
I did. I lived in Oakland on near Telegraph Avenue for 25 years.
Oh, wow.
We lived in North Oakland, myself, my wife, and my children.
Yeah.
We loved the Bay Area.
Yeah, and what inspired the move then up to Washington? It was probably rent, George, was it?
Well, it was. We were living in a really bad neighborhood because I was just getting started teaching these principles, and we got affluent enough to move to a good place. Linda said, "I'm not crazy about living in the Bay Area. We'll move up to my parents' property temporarily," and we moved to Lacona, and then the practice followed us, and we had this big practice out of Lacona, Washington.
Yeah, well, you were...
At one time, we had like 7 people locally, and then there were, another 7 from around the country. Yeah. So it was living in a small town with a big business.
Yeah. Well, and you were, at that time, George, now you were a relationship therapist. Do I have that right?
I was primarily a marriage and family counselor. I saw individuals as well. But then we got involved in working with businesses, and then the practice multiplied by a big factor.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now I introduce you as the man with one answer to solve all your problems. But before we put you on the spot for that light, George, tell us a little bit about. Because I had a lot of people email and say, well, who is this guy now? And what is this 3 principles thing that you're talking about, Dermot? Because I've kind of prepped the last few shows. I've been talking a little bit about the 3 principles and this connection between, our thought creating our feeling. But even before we talk about that, could you share a little bit about, because you made a dramatic switch, George, from processes and techniques and tools to handle stress, to handle anxiety and working on the relationship, to something completely different. And you met this man, Sid Banks. Can you tell us a little bit of the impact that Sid had on your life and what he was up to?
Well, back before 1974, I was, in psychology, doing seminars and teaching people how to manage stress and how to communicate. And I thought I was on the leading edge of things, because we were doing these processes that were very, very efficient. And I couldn't help noticing that people would come in one week or 1 month with a problem with their sister, and then they would solve it, and they come back the next month and they'd have a problem with their brother, something like that. So it was like
that wasn't me, George, was
the
it?
same people were coming to the seminars.
Yeah.
And I said to my partner John, I said, John, there's got to be a way that we can teach people to fish rather than giving them fish. He said, well, I don't know of any. I think we're doing as well as anybody. But after a while, it got old for me. I thought, I don't know about this, taking people's money every month for a different problem. And then I heard about this guy in Vancouver, or in the up near Vancouver, named Sid Banks. And John was told that this guy had this way of talking to people, and then they would get very healthy. The couples would reunite, and people who were kind of dropped out would go back to work, and people who were, workaholics would learn to relax. So he presented it as kind of a good for what ails you.
Yeah.
And John and I couldn't understand it because the guy that talked to us said, he's got no techniques, he's got no methodology, he's got no processes, and he doesn't have a real program. He just gives talks for 45 minutes.
Yeah. And he wasn't hypnotizing people either.
He wasn't hypnotizing people, so we said to him, well, what does he talk about? They said, I don't know. He talks about how the mind works and well-being, and, it was kind of heady stuff. It was, philosophical stuff. So we said to him, well, how is it possible that you can talk to people and they get better? I don't get it. So he said to us, come up here, see for yourself, and we did. And we went into the room where Sid was talking, and Sid was just he was just a blue collar worker. He was a welder.
Yeah, and to make matters worse, he was Scottish.
He was Scottish, yeah. I know you don't like to hear that, but he was.
I like the Scottish.
And he had an epiphany, you might say, a moment of truth. Yeah. And in that moment of truth, he realized the role of thought in life. And then later realized that behind the human experience is the essential intelligence and nature of life, that we were, a part of a bigger intelligence, which he called mind. And then he eventually came up with these principles that explained how the mind works. And I was very taken by it, so much so that within 6 months, I had dropped my practice, which was very successful with my partner, John, and I started teaching what little I knew about this. Mm-hmm. So that was, my income went from $80,000 a year to $8,000 a year in a month. And I was thrilled to be teaching this, and felt like at some point the world would be the path to my doorstep, because Linda and I felt like we had the ultimate service, product of well-being.
Yeah. Now, how did you, George? What was the difference between what you were doing before and the impact that it was having on the people, after you met Sid?
Well, before I met Sid, I was essentially teaching people to manage stress and distress. Yeah. So if you had a leaky roof, I was putting a bucket under it. I was managing it after the fact. When I met Sid, I saw the possibility, a very realistic possibility, that people could eliminate stress before the fact. They could take on less stress. They could lower the amount of stress that they took on in the first place, which was way better than managing it. So instead of, putting a bucket under a leaky roof, I saw the potential of fixing the roof, of teaching people how the mind works so that they didn't have the stress to start with. Now, I'm not saying that they were stressed less, but they had less and less over time as they gained this understanding. So it was very realistic for people to live in a life where their minds were free and clear, and they didn't have, stress and distress impinging on them.
Yeah.
Well, that's a difference.
Yeah, and that is a big difference. Well, I think, I always used to laugh, managing my stress. That's like, managing my girlfriend or managing my life. It doesn't sound very fun or empowering, to be always managing. It's like you have a crazy horse that lives at your house, and every day you go out and you wrestle the horse to the ground, and that's how you manage the horse. And I called George Pransky. I said, "Now, George, I managed the horse today. How should I manage him tomorrow?" And you said, "Oh, Dermot, do this." Okay, I'll do that. And then I call it, and that to me seems like the kind of approach that we're living in. It's like, manage this, manage your thought, manage that, and you're saying the complete opposite of this. You're saying, are you basically saying, George, that there is no stress, and that the only stress is that the only the only stress is that it's the thought connected, creating the feelings. That's the stress.
Yeah, I'm saying that all stress, all distress is self-created via a person's thinking and brought to life by what we call consciousness. So in order for a human being to have stress, they have to have a stressful or distressful thought in their mind. If a person doesn't have a stressful or distressful thought in their mind, it's impossible for them to have stress. It's impossible. It just couldn't happen.
So you're basically saying that thought is the only thing that creates our feelings that we interpret as stress. Would that be fair?
Exactly. Yeah. Stress is a thought is the only thing that is capable of creating the experience of stress. Well, and also the experience of sadness, the experience of joy. It all comes to us via thought. Thought is the way we determine how we feel and what experience we have, whether we know it or not.
See, in my mind, George, that to me is so huge, but yet it's so simple. My brain has a hard time making it huge.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, it's so simple. Oh, that's just your thoughts. You know, I heard Sid Banks used to just, when people would say, oh, I have this wrong with me and I have that wrong with me, and he'd just say, forget about it. Or actually, he'd say, oh, forget about it.
Yeah, he'd say, oh, that's just your thoughts, Dermot. That's just... Now, I remember one time I came to his house. He was having a little get-together, and I was really wrapped around the axle about some thing that happened with my wife and myself. Mm-hmm. So I was really noticeably stressed out. And he was there, and he saw it, and he came over and talked, and he kind of laughed, and he said, aren't you glad that it's just thought? I said, what do you mean, Sid?
And I bet you just said, thought? Thank you, that's wonderful.
Yeah. He said, well, whatever it is you're going through, George, it's just thought, and thought is by nature transitory, so it's going to pass, and when it passes, it'll be gone. And knowing that really keeps people from freaking out. Like you were mentioning the fires.
Yeah.
You see, now, the way people think about the fires is going to be different from person to person. All right? So you get 10 people. Some people are, say, on the freaked out edge. Other people are on the other end where they're not so freaked out. Now, the way those 10 people think about the fires is going to be determined their experience of the fire. Like, will the fire be, emotionally unsettling and knock out their emotional equilibrium, or will the fire be less impactful than that? It all depends on how they think about it. And the other thing is, the people who tend to worry, will probably think about it in a worried way more so than people who don't tend to think in that way. Yeah. It really is all in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you're saying, George, because I had a friend of mine, and they're an 80-year-old couple. And they were staying at our house for a few days, because they were evacuated at 3:00 in the morning there on Sunday morning. And they came to my house anyway, and he's a very interesting man, I have to say, very fascinating man. And I said to him, I said, look, Jim, I said, because there was a real chance that his house was going to be burnt down. He lived in the house for over 40 years, raised his kids and all that, And I said to him, Jim, I said, there's a good chance that house of yours and everything on it. Now, he had nothing but the pants, the underwear, and the shirt on his back. They got out of the house in about 5 minutes flat, George. So they didn't have anything, not even a toothbrush.
Wow.
But you still need to give me that toothbrush back, Jim. Actually, he left yesterday with taking it, but that's another story. And I said to him, Jim, look, if your house is burnt down, he says, what are you going to do? And there was a moment of silence. And I'm of course thinking, oh, Jim's going to give me this big, answer. Well, it's this and it's that and blah, blah, blah. And he says, he said, the foundation will still be there. Most of the plumbing will still be there. And he said, I won't have to move any rubble because it's all ash.
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I reckon I could put a house back up in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
And I just thought, now I have other friends that said, Jesus, if you lose your house, what's going to happen? And I've had the opposite where it's like, I have no idea, Dermot, what I'm going to do. Everything that I am and everything that I own and everything that I love is in that house.
Mm.
What would you say to someone, George, who said that? Now, I don't want to belittle what's going on here, but I'm also, because we have you on the phone, I also want to see if we can share a different way of looking at this or a different perspective.
Well, actually, your friend illustrates an excellent point. You see, it's not a coincidence that he came up with all those great ideas about, the implications of the fire. He said, he kind of broke it down. He said, I won't have, usually rubble is a problem. I won't have that because everything's ashes. If the foundation is ruined, that's problematic, but mine won't be. And actually, it won't take that long to build it up. Now, that creative thinking, you might say, or that clear thinking was available to him because he wasn't wrapped around the axle emotionally. If he'd been upset, if he'd been freaked out, he would not have had those clear thoughts, those proactive, productive thoughts. So the problem with getting, having your thoughts come back on you when you get upset or you get fearful or you get discouraged, part of the problem is the pain of feeling those painful feelings. Mm-hmm. The other problem is you don't get any new ideas. You don't get any good ideas like he did. So it's no coincidence that he was able to come up with those ideas given that he remained emotionally stable. If he had lost his emotional stability, he would not have had those thoughts. He would have just had thoughts about how bad it was and how it could get worse and am I going to be able to afford this and afford that? He would have been very muddled in his thinking. But his emotional stability created a platform on which he could get new thinking. Mm. No. And that is true of everybody. Like when I get wrapped around the axle, Dermot, which happens to me, I don't have any good thinking. I don't have any new thinking. I don't have any inspired thinking. And then when I get over it, all these ideas come to me, and I say, why didn't I think of that before?
Yeah. What I hear in that, George, is the best way to solve a problem is to not think about it.
is to not think about it and clear your mind.
Yeah.
That's what helps people solve problems, is clearing their minds.
Now, George, now I'm going to be the advocate for the listener here, because I know I'm going to get emails about this, so I'm just going to throw it out there. Like some people might say, well, my friend Jim is he's just not attached to his emotions, so he's men being primarily logical, women being primarily emotional, although I don't know if that stands up in court. But, some people might say, well, he's just not emotional about his house. He's not really feeling the impact of losing his house. He's just gone to a very logical place.
Well, I don't know if that's true or not, Dermot, because I didn't know Jim, but the thing is, he might feel very appreciative and warmly towards his house, and the fire might make his gratitude for his house even more than before. In other words, his emotion could have been, gee, this fire has really made me appreciate how much I love my house. And he also might have had the thought, wow, I'm really feel inspired because even though I love my house, I'm pretty sure I could improve upon it if I could build it again.
Yeah.
If I could rebuild it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying that he should do that. I'm saying that might have been what happened to him.
Yeah.
So he would be having just as much total feeling as someone else who was very, very attached to the house. He would just have a different feeling, but it would be just as strong. So it's not necessary that he's turned off or has no feeling. He just would have a different set of feelings if he didn't freak out.
Yeah.
It's like if you have the passing of someone, there are some people who feel really much more warmly and appreciative of that person because of their passing, and there's other people who freak out because they say, "Gee, now what am I going to do if I don't have that person in my life?"
Yeah, and I can vouch for Jim. I mean, I know Jim loves that house loves it because he built it from nothing. I mean, and
yeah.
It's a project. Now, I asked his wife the same question, and she just turned it to me with a big smile. And she says, God, Dermot, wouldn't that be a great lesson in non-attachment?
Yeah.
And I was like, wow. That to me is powerful. But let me turn the spotlight now, George, to the other person, to the friends of mine that I said, look, what are you going to do here now if the house burns down? And they said, I don't know. And there was a lot of it. And it's interesting. You talk about that clear place. And you talk about our thinking creating our feeling, so that we're not living in the feeling of the environment. We're living in the feeling of our thinking. So that's where that non-attachment comes in, George. Do I have that right? You're not.
Yeah, saying, you do, Dermot. Yeah. Like the possibility that an upset or troubled person could have a new thought that would pull them out of that mire, I think is extremely hopeful and is completely accurate and truthful and realistic, because that's what happens to people. If you look at the last time you got very upset, okay, anybody got very troubled or upset, I guarantee you that at some future point they didn't feel that way. There's no way that they feel exactly the same over time. We get over things, okay? And when we get over them, we feel very differently, and we have a lot of more freedom in our minds and a lot more new thinking and a lot more responsive thinking. Now, this happens to everybody. I'm not saying it should happen. I'm saying it does.
Yeah,
but you don't tend to notice it until someone points it out. And I'm kind of pointing that out to people as a living, as a profession. That thought is, in fact, transient. That once our thought changes, we have a whole different experience of life or whatever it is we were thinking about. And that happens to people, and that this is, if you understand that, you don't take your bad feelings as seriously. You take them more in perspective.
Yeah, and so you're not saying, George, just to clarify here, you're not saying that hey, we have all these fires going on, and it's it's very dramatic for a lot of people, including myself. I got caught up for a few days and just walking around like a. I just didn't know what the hell I was doing with myself. But you're not saying that, hey, you shouldn't feel sad or mad or angry or peed off about this. But just know that at some point those feelings will go away. I'm not sure I'm asking the best question.
Yeah, that's right. I think I would use the term that they would get over those those thoughts would leave their mind, and they would have a different experience. I don't know. I mean, I might be totally upset and freaked out. I mean, people have whatever experience they have, but it helps people to know that their experiences are transitory and that their experiences are being created within their own minds via their own thinking. That's the only thing that's happening, is they're experiencing their feelings and the thoughts that are creating those feelings. It helps people to know that that's all that's happening. That doesn't mean it's not painful and it's not suffering, because it is, depending on the thoughts that you have. But it's helpful for people to have a wiser, more circumspect view. Now, I'll give you a corollary. Imagine that someone have a really bad headache and their throat is a little sore and they can't breathe as well as they normally do, and they think, oh my God, I have some type of dread disease here. I wonder how long I'm going to live. This is terrible. And they go to a doctor, and the doctor says, oh, yeah, you just got a cold. So, well, are you going to give me anything? No. In 24 hours, you'll be over it. Now, even though the person still has the cold and still has the symptoms, that understanding that it's just a temporary issue is going to lift their spirits, make them hopeful, and they'll actually feel a lot better even though they have the same symptoms, because they won't be making themselves feel worse through their worry and concern. Now, I'm saying the same exact thing. You could substitute cold for being upset or being troubled. The same thing could be true. That too shall pass, and when it does, you'll be in a whole different state. And that gives people well-being, even in the face of the fact that they're still X amount troubled.
Mm. Yeah, I like that, George. George, I'm going to throw out a question, and then we're going to come back after I do a station ID. George, why is it that, speaking of feelings, why is it that men would rather take a bullet than talk about our feelings? So we'll be right back to talk about that in just a second. You're listening to the Celtic Coach Radio Show, an Irish talk show just for men, and all things manly on KOWS LP 92.5 FM, Occidental, California. All right, if you've just joined us, welcome. You're listening to the Celtic Coach Radio Show, a talk show for men. And our guest today is a very, very fascinating man. Mr. Dr. George Pransky is with us today, one of the two founders of a breakthrough approach to human understanding that is currently among the fastest growing approaches in the world. Dr. Pransky has taught over 40 years, and he's a man that knows what the heck he's talking about. All right, we threw out a question just for a little bit of fun, George. Why is it that, myself included in this, George, that I'd rather take a bullet than talk about my feelings to the little lady? Why are feelings for at least for men, this is a men's show, but I know a lot of the ladies, and bless all the ladies for listening in, they're wanting to understand us more, George. So maybe you could put a little bit of a spotlight on, why is it we have a tough time talking about our feelings?
Well, your question is, why is it that men are, want nothing to do with talking about feelings with their wives or loved ones?
Way, yes.
And that's a good observation. Now, I'm going to give it a little context. I as you said earlier, I wrote this book, The Relationship Handbook, and in our relationship practice, we have most of the people who come to us are selected by the men. In other words, the men are the ones that said, I want to see this guy, Pransky, and his wife, which is very unusual. You ask 100 marriage and family counselors, who comes to you most, the women or the men? They'll say, oh, the women, 10 to 1.
Yeah.
Now, the reason that men like the relationship handbook and like the counseling that we do based on it is because it puts emotions and feelings in a wiser perspective. So, generally speaking, I'm not saying this is always true, generally speaking, the problem that women have with feelings is that they believe in them. They believe that they represent something valid in the world. Like if they don't like someone, they believe that the reason they don't like them and feel bad about them is because what the person did. Or if their husband is messy, they would say, well, the reason I'm feeling dissatisfied with my husband is because of his mess. They don't understand that feelings are just a reflection of our thinking in the moment. And men are afraid of feelings because they see how the women struggle with them, that they're afraid of getting, going down the rabbit hole with their emotions. So their answer is, well, I'll just ignore them.
And that doesn't work either, George.
No, it doesn't. It works very badly.
Yes, it exacerbates the problem.
They don't have a feel for life, and they don't have the richness of life, whereas the women have that richness and that feel for life, but they can get, sucked into their feelings to the point where they suffer. So when people come to see us as couples, we put, feelings in a proper perspective and show people that all they are, they're kind of like a navigational system. Your feelings are a navigational system to tell you the quality of your thinking. So if you're feeling, troubled and sad, you know that your thinking is coming back on you in a bad way, and that will automatically correct itself. And if you're feeling, happy and inspired, it tells you that your thinking is working for you. So we put human thought in proper perspective, in proper context, and the men and the women both appreciate that.
I like that, George. So the feelings are for men and for women, of course, are more of a navigational system or direction. Hey, I'm off right now. I'm on, or I'm a little batty right now. I'm on the crazy wheel.
Yeah, like my wife Linda will say to me, I'm really have a problem with the mess that you made in the kitchen. But then again, George, I'm a little down in the dumps, so don't take it too seriously. So she'll kind of warn me against the feeling behind what you said. But you know what it's like? It's no different from physical pain, Dermot. Like if I'm walking or running or doing something and I get a pain in my legs, it warns me, George, you're abusing your body in some way. So I won't just keep doing it. I'll stop for a second, or I'll do it knowing that I might be hurting my body. I might be in the middle of a sporting activity, and I might think, well, I'm going to do it anyways, which would make sense in that context. But I still know that the pain is telling me that my body is suffering. Now, the same thing is true with emotional suffering. Mm-hmm. It's telling you that you're but you're temporarily hurting yourself with your thinking. Your thinking is coming back on you, and it's creating, feelings that you wish you didn't have, that you don't desire. So it's no different from physical pain. It's a guidance system. It's a compass.
Well,
it tells you how you're using your own psychology, for better or for worse.
Yeah. I like that. And one of the things that you just mentioned there earlier, George, like putting the feelings in their proper perspective. I really like that, because I find myself, and I'm sure everyone else, I'll speak for myself. I get over, I get taken over by my feelings. I'm kind of laughing here, George, because I was thinking, when my little lady, when I say to her, "Oh, what's wrong, honey?" And she said, "Nothing is wrong," but she means everything is wrong. The feelings are maybe not in the proper perspective, George. Am I safe to say that? I'm going to get
and it's easy to get caught up in them. Like I know the most outstanding example of this, and I've told this story a lot of times, is my wife and I were coming back from giving talks in London, and we were both very tired and very cranky. And as we drove home, we was stupid enough to open our mouths, and we got critical of each other, and it spiraled down to the point where she said, "Though the biggest mistake I ever made was marrying you. I could have done so much better." And at the time she said it, she meant it, because that's the thought that she had that came to mind. And I said something in response that was equally rude, and it looked like we were headed for divorce court. And the thing I want to emphasize is, in that moment, we really did think that way and feel that way. It was real to us. We could have taken a lie detector test, and it would have shown that we were truthful. Well, then there was this long silence, because we were both kind of shocked at what the other person said. And Linda said to me, "Aren't you glad we know what we know, that we understand what we understand?" And I said, "I am." And that was the end of it, Dermot. There was no need for an apology. There was no need to sort anything out. There was no need to see whether we really meant what we said. We just understood that if we're feeling that badly about each other, it means that our thinking has really gone south.
Yeah, and that's where that understanding comes in, George. That you know where that it's your thinking that's creating that.
Yeah, it was a temporary illusion that we were both in a terrible marriage. We lived in a terrible marriage for those few minutes.
Yeah, temporary insanity, George. And bless your wife. She, it's interesting because in relationships, on hindsight, we may say, "Oh, you didn't mean what you said there earlier," in a moment of anger.
Yeah.
And, of course, I'll get down on my knees and say, "No, of course I didn't." But are you saying that in those moments we really do mean that, but it's not?
Well, we do in those moments, Dermot. But then a moment later, our thinking, we get new thinking, and it looks like what we said was ridiculous. But in those moments, it's going to look very real. Like my wife the other day got really upset with me and said, "Oh, I hate you. I just can't stand to be around you." Now, she meant it because that's how the thoughts that she had at the time and the feelings that she had. But if you said to her, "Well, do you want me to go get an attorney?" She'd say, "Well, no, I'm just upset. I'm just caught up in my negative thinking right now. That's all that's happening." So even if it was happening, and even as she meant it in the moment, she knew the nature of thought, and she knew that she probably wouldn't be thinking that in 10 minutes or 20 minutes.
Yeah, and see, one of the things I hear you talk about, George, is that we have this default system that, the New Agers will say, "Oh, we're all one and we're all peace and we're all love and all of this." But in actual fact, I hear in some of the talks that you've given that, if peace is our nature, then the default setting, like on a computer, is we will always at some point calm down and come back to that peaceful state. Do I have that right?
That's 100% right, Dermot. Our nature is love, joy, peace of mind. That's our nature. And if you don't think so, look at the kids. Kids are all that way. They have this, peace about them, and they get upset, but they always come back to the love and the peace there and the joy. They get a kick out of everything. And people are that way when they're on vacation. They're that way. They're more peaceful, more loving, more joyful.
Yeah.
So, and the only thing it is when our mind's clear, our true nature comes out. And even though that's our true nature, we can override that with our thinking in any given moment. So even though my nature is to be loving, I can get upset and lose that love temporarily.
But we'll always come back to it because we are that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Now, but what about, George, the people that say, well, I went on vacation and thank God, like I hear my friends say, I need a vacation so that I can just relax. And they ascribe the relation, the vacation as a tool to help them relax. What are you saying about that that's different?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it is deceptive that they think that the vacation caused the relaxation, but in actual fact, they just gave themselves permission to relax their minds. That's all they did. And evidence of it is you can talk to people, and I've done this. I've said in a group, I said, when does your vacation start? And one person said, when I leave work on Friday, I'm out of here. I'm relaxed. I'm on vacation. That's when it starts for me. And one other guy says, well, mine usually starts after the first week because it takes me a week to adjust to being on vacation. I still have things on my mind from work. Now, there's no doubt in my mind that that's arbitrary, Dermot. The second person could have the same view as the first person and vice versa. So all that's happening with these people is they're deciding to relax their minds on the guise that they're on vacation. So they'll say, well, yeah, I'm on vacation. I'm paying a lot of money here. I should start smelling the roses. And all of a sudden they start relaxing.
Yeah,
now, the person next to them might say, well, I can't relax and enjoy myself because my room is too small. So when they get back, they say, well, how was your vacation? Well, it wasn't very restful because they were thinking about the fact that their room was too small.
Yeah, see, that's fascinating, George, because what I hear in that is that you know, like oh, well, you know, I can only be relaxed when I'm meditating. I can only be relaxed when I'm listening to music. I can only be relaxed when I'm walking in nature. And you're saying that if we are that peace, that relaxation, what I hear you saying is that we have that anytime, any place, anywhere, any circumstance.
On demand. It's on demand. People's well-being is on demand, and the only thing it takes is people understanding that. It's on demand. It's available at any moment for any person, but people don't see that potential. They don't see how natural it is. Now, this is kind of an ugly example, but the best example to me of how natural health, peace of mind, joy is electric shock therapy. You get someone who's been depressed for 20 years, they've taken medication, they've done therapy, nothing helps. They give them a 3-second shock to their brain, and all of a sudden, their mind clears, even to the extent that they have trouble remembering where they live or whatever, but their mind clears temporarily. And when their mind clears, the instant their mind clears, they feel nothing but joy and love and peace of mind. They feel terrific. And I had a client who came to me, and that happened to him, and he said, not only did I feel great, but I was very productive at work. My mind was so clear. I had such great ideas. I said, then why are you in here? He says, well, I had that about 2.5 weeks ago, and it took me 2.5 weeks to get my thinking back in my head. That's what he said. He literally said that, Dermot. And I said to him, but you know what you just said? You just said that you were doing great, and then you put your old thinking back in your head. He said, yeah, what's your point? I said, well, that's my point. Well, he didn't get it.
Wow.
He didn't think that that's what happened. I had to teach it to him.
But it isn't now. You might again. I'll be the advocate for the listener here, George. And people say, "Well, how do I get to that state, George? How do I get to that understanding? How do I see what you're talking about?"
Well, practically speaking, the only thing a human being can do to improve their plight, well-being wise, is to gain understanding of how the mind works. Mm. Now, practically speaking, in terms of resources, one of the best resources is Sid Banks. That's the best resource, his materials, his books, his CDs, his DVDs. Now, at Pransky and Associates, the best resource we have, in my mind, is the Insight course. We have a course called the Insight course, which is an 8-hour, course on your computer.
Yeah, well, that's the Insight on Relationships online course, right?
Well, we have one on relationships, and we have one on individual well-being. Mm. So there's two, is an Insight Relationships and an Insight just you and your well-being. And it's an 8-hour course. It took us 2 years to make it. It builds on itself. And it's, we've used it with people who are really troubled. and it gets through to them. So that and the Sid Banks materials, those are built to give maximum understanding to people about how the mind works. And all you have to do is understand how the mind works without any effort, without any technique, without any methodology. You'll see that you get over things faster, things don't get to you as much, and you have more love and well-being and peace, more of the natural state in your life, just from understanding. There's no application. You just have to understand the nature of how the mind works.
And I think that's one of the powerful things, George, that I love in your work and in the three principles in general is that it's not a strategy. It's not a technique that, okay, I'm stressed, now I use this technique. Oh, my girlfriend made me angry, now I'm going to use this strategy to be calm. Because that's the outside in approach, that whatever's outside, we use that to try and manipulate the inside. And what you're saying is that we don't have to, regardless of what's going on the outside, we don't have to manipulate our insides.
That's absolutely true. That there is an inner life that you and I have of thought, and we don't have to manage it. We just have to understand it for what it is. That's it. So if you understand it for what it is, you will be protected from your own devices. Even when your thinking is bad, it won't affect you as much. So even when Linda and I, in that example, even though our thinking was horrible, it didn't affect us very much because we had this protective coat of insulation, of understanding that protected us from our own bad thinking. Mm. And that's what his materials and our materials and everybody else's materials are meant to do. They're meant to provide that insulation.
Yeah, it's kind of like I'm thinking here, George, of an analogy of every day I go into the kitchen and I put my hand on the stove and I burn my hand, and then I get somebody tells me about this amazing glove that you can put it on and you can put your hand back on the hot stove and you'll only get burned after about 5 minutes, and that's like a technique. And then someone comes along like yourself and says, "Hey, listen, you don't have to put your hand on the stove
in the first place. And that's and when you have that understanding
or when you have as you call it, an insight, seeing something from within, that automatically changes your behavior. You don't have to work on the behavior.
Yeah, it changes it. And also, and this is the part of it that's a little hard to get across, understanding is like the glove. Even if your behaviors are bad and your thinking is bad, understanding protects you the way the glove protected you from the stove.
Yeah. Yes, I get that. I like that. George, we have about 4 minutes left in our show here, and I'd love to hit you up with we call them the 3 little questions. Would you be up for that?
Absolutely.
Oh, God, I wish I could talk to you all day long, George. It's such a pleasure to be. It's very, I find you a very easy person to talk to, George. It's like I had 100, I wrote down a bunch of questions and I probably asked about 3 of them. But I found it to be a very natural conversation. And I find that the work that you do, George, it seems to be very natural, kind of no-brainer stuff. It's not something I have to really...
But you have to say, Dermot, that your interest in your questioning and the depth of your questions, drew it out of me, so you're partly responsible for whatever you think happened good in this.
Yeah. So we're both full of it, George.
Yeah, we're both full of it. There you go.
All right, George. Here's your 3 questions. And let me see. All right, number 1, George. If you had magical powers, what's one thing that you would change in the world?
Say that again. You broke up a little bit.
If you had magical powers, what's one thing you would change in the world?
If I had magical powers, I would dramatically increase people's levels of consciousness, their understanding of life. That would be the one thing I would do. That's the only thing I'd do.
Number 2, if you could tell if a child came to you and asked you, Uncle George, what's the secret to happiness? What would you say to them?
I would say, if a child asked me the secret of happiness, I would say it's an understanding of how the mind works. That's it. It's all you have to do to be happy is to have a little more understanding of how life works, how the mind works.
And depending on the intelligence of the child, the next question might be, what the hell is the mind, Uncle George? All right, and number 3, when you go to heaven or wherever you think that place is, George, and whatever you think that benevolent being is, what do you want God to say to you when you get up to the pearly gates?
Oh, that's a tough one, Dermot. I don't know. I would love it if he said to me, or she said to me, I really appreciate how much love you've given to people in your lifetime.
Wow, beautiful, George. George,
that would be music to my ears if God said that to me.
Yeah, well, I'll see what I can do for you there, George. No, I'm not promising anything, but George, would you take everything we talked about today in just the last minute of the show, and could you kind of summarize? Not to put you on the spot, but could you just kind of summarize what we're talking about? Maybe highlight some of the most important things that if people just...
Yeah, I could do that.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say is that there's you and I outside in the world doing this and that. Well, there's an inner process made up of thought and brought to life by the senses that is really determining what kind of a life we have and what we would call life and how we see life. Okay? And that inner process is informed by the intelligence behind life. So it's not just random. Left to its own devices, it would give us a very responsive, very beautiful experience of life. And once we trust that, we tend to keep our minds free and enjoy the moment and let life come to us in a responsive way via our own thinking. And that's all there is to what we've talked about today. That's, a complete summary of what we've talked about.
Well, thank you, George. One of the things I'm going to do with this recording, with your permission, George, is I've been working with a lot of the churches in the areas, and I'd love to, and just so you know, George, how it's impacting the people around here, I'm going to send this recording, this MP3, out to all the churches, and they're going to send it out to all their congregation, just as a way to, I think, help people through what's going on, with the fires and everything. So I really appreciate you, George.
I would love it if you did that, Dermot. Yeah. I would be honored if you sent it to all these churches.
Yeah, thank you, George. And I'll send you a copy to your office as well. George,
okay.
It's an absolute pleasure to talk to you, and I just appreciate. I'm very honored, everyone who's listening. I'm in a business course with George right now, and just having a wonderful time with that. So, Insight on Relationships online course, George, and then you also have an online course. And what was the name of that course?
It's just called Insight.
Insight, and we can get all of this and more at Pransky and associates.com. That's Pransky and associates.com. Do I have that right, George?
You have it exactly right.
All right. George, wishing you all the best, my friend, and many blessings to you, and a heartfelt thanks for your time, for your wisdom, and your energy today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Dermot, thanks for inviting me on your show.
All the best, George.